Working Cows Podcast, episode 277. This episode is brought to you by C90 Ocean Minerals.
Welcome to the podcast that gives producers a platform to discuss and share paradigm-challenging practices. Practices that have increased the effectiveness of their operation and the joy that their families have received from this lifestyle.
Howdy, everybody. This is Clay Connery, host of the Working Cows Podcast, recorded exclusively in the C90 Ocean Minerals studios. And this episode is brought to you by C90 Ocean Minerals, the first step in regenerative agriculture. C90 offers a complete spectrum of natural minerals and trace elements that feed soil biology, enzymes, and fungi to help regenerate your soil matrix and improve soil fertility. Herd and pasture health starts with soil health, and C90 restores the optimal mineral balance needed for healthy, productive soil. Naturally unlock locked up fertilizer nutrients, expand root networks, and reduce risk, all while investing equally in this season and the ones to come. Give them a call today, and their experts will develop a complimentary custom program that fits your operation. Call 717-580-1458. That's 717-580-1458, or visit c-90.com. Available nationwide and around the world. Very excited to be joined today by Gabe Brown. Once again, I've had the pleasure of having him on multiple times and really appreciate his participation in episode 250, calling in and leaving a voicemail with his advice for the next generation. Today, we're going to talk to Gabe about the state of the American food system. And Gabe, over the years, has kind of gained a set of experiences and been exposed to a set of circumstances with regard to the American food production system that I think uniquely qualifies him to speak to this in a way that maybe we don't hear very often. And so really excited to talk to Gabe today about the state of the American food system. So Gabe, thanks for joining me once again on the Working Cows Podcast. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you, Clay.
So as I sit and think, what do I want to talk to Gabe Brown about? Kind of the state of our food system came to mind, and I thought, I think you've got a fairly broad view of our food system and the production system and where we are, where we've been, where we're going. And so I thought maybe we'd kind of use that as an outline for our discussion today. And I guess we just start with kind of where have we been? What you can go back as far as you want, Gabe, as far as food production in America is concerned and kind of how we got to where we are. But yeah, where have we been?
Good question, Clay. And the fact that I think we need to realize that we're only a few generations removed from a food system that was much more focused on producing and purchasing food locally. And, it wasn't that long ago, we're talking 1920s, 30s, most of the food was grown, raised, within a reasonable distance from where it was consumed. And you fast forward to where we are now. I was in the grocery store last week, and I'm always curious looking to see on products where they're from. And of course, that's another whole subject if we get into how they label that. But I happen to notice, obviously this time of the year here, can't find any locally produced peppers. And I was looking at what was available there, and I had two choices, Mexico or Denmark. Okay. So I'm thinking to myself now, just how much nutrients can there be left in that pepper coming from Mexico? And when was it picked in order to get it to Bismarck, North Dakota, let alone Denmark? I mean, that Denmark pepper, that's probably picked 3 weeks ago. Who knows? And we're about as far removed from a localized food system as we can get. And when you get looking at that, what happened during the COVID pandemic at the onset, I think it really shed a light on just how fragile that type of food system is. And, there was a major resurgence in trying to source food locally. And I think that's a good thing because consumers get to meet their farmer, their rancher then.
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned in owning a coffee shop for 10 years is that food comes to the grocery store twice a week. So you miss one truck, you miss a Thursday truck, and by the end of the weekend you're out of food. Yep. And so we're in a real everything has to hit on all cylinders. Like you said, the COVID pandemic revealed that. Everything has to hit on all cylinders, keep the shelves full.
And along with that, Clay, is look at the consumers. How many of them only purchase for a day or two at a time? I can't imagine, of course, here on our ranch, we mostly consume only what we produce. And grocery stores could shut down and I could live a year easily. But to think of only going day to day, that's a pretty fragile food system.
Yeah. No, and we were there mostly because I was in the grocery store 3 or 4 times a week for the coffee shop. We would kind of just buy our groceries while we were there. So that was kind of us. And now I live 85 miles from the nearest grocery store or 40 miles from the nearest small town grocery store. And so, we're kind of once a month if we try to get by on once a month. And so, yeah, we if we showed up to buy groceries and they had missed a truck or two, we'd be back to eating beef only, I guess, and we'd probably do better on that anyways than the processed food that we buy. So, but yeah, so you mentioned the nutrients left in the food. Is that kind of the way it works, that the longer that food is removed from the vine, the fewer there's a decreasing nutrient value throughout that process?
There is some of that, but we have another crisis going on that affects it even more so. And that's the fact that our soils are so degraded. I have the good fortune. I travel extensively all over the world. I'm on the road about 280 plus days a year, and I'm on literally hundreds of farms and ranches every year. And I tell people, in the past, it's really been almost 20 years now of traveling extensively. I have never, ever been on a single farm or ranch, including my own, that's not degraded. Everyone is farming and ranching degraded ecosystems. One of my pet peeves is when I have to listen to politicians brag about, the fantastic job farmers and ranchers are doing caring for the land. And don't get me wrong, farmers and ranchers do care for the land, but most farmers and ranchers don't realize that their ecosystems are on a slow rate of decline. And I don't mean to get controversial, and don't hold Clay to this. If listeners get mad at Gabe if it's bothering you, but the fact of the matter is, no matter where I travel all over the world, approximately 75%, and then it varies, from 50% on up, but approximately 75% of the carbon that was once in the soil is now in the atmosphere. And because of that, then we have soil that is not nearly as biologically active. It goes from a soil that has a balance of bacteria and protozoan nematodes, mycorrhizal fungi, to one now that's highly bacterial and not able to cycle the nutrients needed to put these phytonutrient compounds in the plants, and thus it doesn't end up in the food supply. And it's these phytonutrient compounds that really drive human health and drive animal health. And so as we've degraded our soils, the nutrient density of the foods has decreased substantially. Of course, we raise a lot of things on our ranch, but I'm always partial to beef. That's our number one product that we produce. You look at beef, for instance, quote unquote average conventional type beef has lost approximately 55% of the iron as compared to beef that was raised in 1940. Well, most people think they're eating beef, they're eating it for the iron. Well, yeah, you're going to get iron, and I'm not here to tell anybody not to consume beef. It's still a good product to consume, but it's not near as high in nutrients as it once was. And so that's what really drives this. And now I'm not placing all of the current human health crisis on the backs of farmers and ranchers. There's plenty of blame to go around, sedentary lifestyles, et cetera,
food pyramid with grains at the bottom.
Yeah, United States spends more on healthcare than any other country in the world. Yet, take a look at the facts. We're at the top or near the top, and ADD, ADHD, Alzheimer's, autoimmune diseases, cancer, osteoporosis, and the list goes on. And I contend that a lot of that is due to the degraded soils that we're growing and raising our products on. So we have to start the focus there, Clay.
A lot of those things you list are above my pay grade, and osteoporosis is, I'm sure, too, but that's a bone density issue, and that seems to be pretty obvious in my mind, that if you have a hard substance that isn't staying as hard as it used to for a long time, it's probably a lack of nutrients and minerals coming to you through your diet, and those things, So that's correct. That's kind of where we've been and where we are somewhat, but what are you seeing as far as a shift back, or are we getting close to a tipping point? I think Malcolm Gladwell in his book Tipping Point talks about 14% adoption rate before you start to see a big shift. Are we getting close to a tipping point as far as moving in a better direction, or is it still a pretty small movement?
No, we are. And, it's not coming fast enough for some of us who have been in this so long. But, the word regenerative and the words regenerative agriculture have really, sprang to the forefront the past 3 years in particular. Back 10 years ago, there was very few of us talking about regenerative agriculture. Now, I was amazed. I opened a recent John Deere's Furrow magazine, and nearly every article talked about something about regenerative agriculture in it. And I thought, how ironic, we go from a company that's known for plowing, starting in the trend of plowing, and now they're promoting regenerative ag. So we're seeing it in our business, Understanding Ag, regenerative consulting business. The interest is overwhelming almost. So I'm not going to say it's at the tipping point yet, but it's quickly becoming so. And not only from farmers and ranchers, where we see a major amount of interest lie is in that of large multinational companies that want, of course, they're in the business to make a profit, and how do they get more consumers to buy their products? And they realize that nothing has resonated with consumers like have the words regenerative agriculture. So there's a major interest in how do they move their supply chains down the regenerative path.
Yeah, and it's, I think that is a blessing and a curse, right? That there's this concern about, we're using the word, but we're meeting different things. And there's this concern that, we're not on the same page as far as what all these things mean. So I guess, do you have any perspective on that, or anything to add to that conversation?
Oh boy, do I. So, as someone who's pretty much focused my life on spreading the word and the benefits of being regenerative, I always tell people, people say, well, I want to be sustainable. And I ask them, why would you want to sustain a degraded resource? We need to regenerate our resources first. so future generations can be sustainable. Well, since you opened this, you threw me this softball, I'll tell you about what my partners and I did. Last year, we formed a company named Regenified. And the reason we did that is we saw just what you were talking about, that greenwashing going on. Let me give you a brief example of this. I had a very large company in the petroleum industry contact me, and they were looking to source regeneratively grown soybeans to make biodiesel oil. And so I put together a proposal and said, we can educate the farmers, we'll move them down the regenerative path. And they said, no, we just want to pay them a minimal amount extra per bushel if they're no-tilling, and that's regenerative. No, that's not regenerative. Okay. So we refused to work with them because they really didn't have farmers' best interest at heart. So there's all this greenwashing that's taking place. So the goal of Regenified, the company Regenified is a standalone company that verifies regenerative practices on farms and ranches. So what we're able to do is go and measure how well a producer, farmer or rancher, is doing moving down the regenerative path. Are they adopting the 6 principles of soil health? Are they adopting the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship? And how is that driving the 4 ecosystem processes? The beautiful thing in what we developed, and it was Doug Peterson, our chief scientific officer, who developed it, is you're only compared to yourself. So it doesn't matter what your neighbors are doing. We do a baseline on your farm or ranch, and then are you improving? The next thing is it demands continuous improvement within your context. And the reason we have that stipulation is we can't control if there's hail or drought that affect your ability to move down. So we have to have those caveats put in there for those situations. But part of the problem with a lot of the verification processes out there are they're just checking a box. And if you meet these minimum standards, you're good to go. Well, that doesn't demand the improvement that's necessary to regenerate. So now our goal with Regenified is all these companies who are making all these claims, like Walmart wants so many million acres regenerative by the year 2030. General Mills wanted 1 million acres by 2030. Well, okay, we're going to hold you to those standards then. How are you going to do that? You're not going to do it without the farmer or rancher. But this is where the difference lies. We demand that those companies pay that farmer or rancher, a premium for these regenerative products. Because our goal, getting back to, I think, the basis of your whole questioning today, where you been, where are we going? We have to restore farm and ranch profitability. That has to be number one. And in our minds, the way to do that is to enhance the function of the ecosystem so ranchers can lower their input costs, plus reward them with greater returns for what they're producing. If you're producing nutrient-dense food, you should be rewarded for that. We as farmers and ranchers have to quit being ashamed of what we charge for our products. Not everybody can afford a Cadillac. It bothers me when people say that, oh man, I can't feed my children bacon and eggs for breakfast. What are you paying for that sugar-laden cereal that you're feeding them? Yep. I'll guarantee they can eat some healthy eggs and bacon at a lower price point than they can feed their children that cereal, right?
Yep.
So we have to get back to thinking of food as preventative medicine and reward farmers and ranchers accordingly. So I said a mouthful there, Clay, but
no, that was really good. I appreciate it. I'm glad you were, so well prepared for that. I think you knocked it out of the park. So appreciate that answer. So where do we need to go from here? We kind of talked about where we've been, and I think that's something that we so often just totally forget, that our grandparents lived in a different world. My grandparents, my both of my grandpas were World War II veterans. They lived in a different world as far as the way they got their food. They didn't get bell peppers from Denmark or Mexico. They didn't probably eat bell peppers in January.
Exactly.
So, do we need to go back to that kind of a system? How is that where we need to go, or what do you think in your mind?
Sure. No, let's face reality. We will not go back to that type of system. However, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be sourcing our food. Consumers need to source their food more locally. They need to know their farmer or rancher. They need to know the practices that farmer or rancher is using on their operation and feel good about them and have the confidence. Look at right now. Okay, I was just watching this morning on the news this. Everybody says it's a crisis because eggs are reaching $4 a dozen, and I'm like, no, they're a very nutrient dense food if produced in the right manner. Okay, why are the egg prices skyrocketing? It's because of avian influenza. Well, what is that affecting? That's affecting these large confinement operations. Okay, we have about 1,000 laying hens, a little over on our farm. We've never been affected by it. And yet they say, oh, you've got to watch it. You got to keep those birds inside and sheltered. No, if an animal is healthy, they're not going to be affected by something like that. Okay, the issue isn't the wild animals bringing avian influenza on. The issue is how we're raising those birds in confinement, closed housing, so they don't have the immune system. The same thing happens with a human being. We're seeing today, I mean, I'm getting up there in age, but I just kind of laugh. I have grandkids, and all these kids nowadays are affected. They're allergic to this, allergic to that. They can't eat this, can't eat that. Let your kids go out and play in some soil and see how healthy they become, right? Let them get some manure on their fingers, get some biology in their mouth, and they'd become a lot healthier. I know that's kind of a disgusting thought, but really it isn't, because it's biology, and it's our gut is our immune system. We need to get back to that. And
the biology in our gut is very closely, as I understand it, related to the biology in the soil.
Absolutely.
Those two are very closely.
Don't wash your carrots before you eat them.
As long as you're getting them from the right place.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we give the chicken too little credit, right? I mean, it's a dadgum dinosaur adapted to live in a world after Noah's flood. So, I mean,
yeah. That's right. That's right.
Give it some
Chickens
credit.
are amazing.
Yes.
They're amazing. If you would have told me that Gabe Brown would enjoy sitting out there and watching chickens move over a pasture, I would have just shook my head years ago. But now that's entertainment.
Yeah. I've been angling to buy a new horse trailer, and it's not new. I don't own anything new. I've been angling to buy a used horse trailer, and my wife said, yes, you can buy the used horse trailer, but you have to turn my current horse trailer into a chicken house. And I said,
there we go.
That's a deal.
I travel a lot, and I just can't eat eggs when I'm off traveling, because there's such a difference between them and the eggs we produce, free range. It's amazing.
Yeah. I don't know where I heard you say it, but I heard you say one time, you go out and buy the most expensive egg you can find in the grocery store, and I'll put it up against mine any day of the week.
Well, yeah, that's right. That was in the movie Kiss the Ground. That's what they actually did. They went and bought eggs in the store and compared it to our eggs, and pretty amazing, the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the way, what I hear you saying is that this is a networking issue, that we need to be networked with the people consuming our food, and the people consuming food need to be networked with the people that they're getting their food from.
It's an education issue, Clay. Okay. I often get asked, okay, if regenerative agriculture is so good, why aren't more farmers and ranchers doing it? Well, I tell them farmers and ranchers cannot implement what they do not know. Okay, I have several college degrees in agriculture. Never once did any of my instructors mention anything about the 4 ecosystem processes. You know, I bet if I went out and gave every farmer or rancher a test and asked them how a soil aggregate is formed, I guarantee you 97% of them could not answer correctly. Yet their livelihood depends on that soil aggregate, depends on the water infiltrating, the biology living around it, yet they couldn't answer that. So it's a lack of education to the farmers and ranchers. It's a lack of education to the consumers. We are involved in several studies with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, Dr. Fred Provenza, Dr. Scott Kronberg that are measuring the phytonutrient compounds in foods. So what they have Understanding Ag doing is we're identifying farms that are using and ranches that are using these regenerative practices, and then a neighboring farm or ranch that is not. And we're growing the same grain, raising the same livestock species, same vegetables, etc., and comparing the phytonutrients. And most consumers don't have a clue that it's phytonutrients that really drive our immune system, our gut health, feeding the biology in our gut. It's these phytonutrients. And the more phytonutrients and the wider array of phytonutrients we put in our bodies, the healthier our immune system is. So it's a lack of education to the consumer. And then it goes right down the line. I talked about the human health crisis. The medical community is probably the ones that need to be informed the most, yet they have the least amount of information. I actually, Clay, had a doctor. I was talking to a civic group about nutrient density in food and consumers. I actually had a doctor come up to me afterwards and say, Gabe, you're forgetting I make my living writing prescriptions. He actually told me that. I was so mad. Oh, I was mad. I come right out. You know me, I got a big mouth. But I said, and did you not take an oath? You know, I just thought how hypocritical of him that he should be concerned about the health and well-being of his patients, not about writing prescriptions. So Dr. Van Vliet, Kronberg, and Provenza are doing some excellent work. We did studies down in the southeastern U.S. This past year. They were up here in the northern Great Plains working on farms and ranches. What we're seeing come out of that, they're hoping shortly they'll be able to move to human trials. In other words, feed humans these products that are high in these phytonutrients, and then another subset, those that are much lower in the diversity and array of phytonutrients. It'll be interesting to see what comes out of that, because then we get back to the education. We're educating throughout. And then we got to educate the supply chains. But the supply chains are driven, of course, by consumer demand.
Yep.
So it's an education process, Clay.
What does that look like in your mind? What's the education of the consumer look like in your mind? Because if I hear somebody tell your story one more time, I think I might eat my hat.
Yeah. So what I think that entails is getting the facts. When I'm out speaking and I'm talking to groups about direct marketing and selling their products and, you know, adding value to their products, one of the first things I ask them is, have you done nutrient testing on your products? Do you know what you're really producing? You'd be amazed how few do. So I think it behooves the farmer rancher to educate as well. You know, for us to just sit back and say, oh, the Beef Commission's going to do the education. Come on. You know, they might do what they can, but they don't even know this. Right. So we need to do the education. And we need to, first of all, though, we have to have the products that we can tout are more nutrient dense.
Is it, I mean, but tell me, what does it look like? Is it sitting in the grocery store like Sam's Club with samples? I mean, what does it look like?
No, it has to be a much broader than that.
Right.
And that's one of the goals of Regenified, is that we form these alliances. Okay. We have the supply chain that wants to prove that the product that they're selling is regenerative, so they can make that claim to consumers. Then it's an education process. The company needs to go educate the consumers. It's in their best interest to sell more of their product. The farmer rancher becomes the eye candy, so to speak, story, which they deserve to be the story. They're the ones out there doing the work on the landscape. So I call it common ground for common good. Okay. Farmer rancher wants increased profit. The supply chain, they make these claims about being regenerative and helping fight climate change. And don't get me started on that, but but why can't we come together for the good of all and to educate? Then we also have to educate, the health industry. One of the other things that I think is be the most difficult to do is to educate our politicians. Yep. Because they're actually one of the reasons that regenerative agriculture has not grabbed hold faster than it has, is because of a farm policy that is totally inept and makes no sense. And that's a topic for a whole other podcast, Clay.
Yeah, we got a little taste of that a couple of weeks ago on the Working Cows podcast about a different approach to the farm bill. Anyways, so there's a lot of inertia here, right? This is a big rock to get moving. Where do you think we're at? How far have we got a big stick under this rock and we're starting to get some leverage, or where are we at?
We have the fulcrum there. I can tell you to realize I'm under signed NDA, so I can't mention companies, but we have been contacted by many major companies that want help moving their supply chains down this path. And I want to say this because I don't want people listening to your podcast thinking that, I'm all pro big business. No, my heart lies with the individual farmer and rancher, and that's who we look out for. That's what we're trying to do. But I can't be so naive and not realize the vast majority of farmers and ranchers are selling into those supply chains. Yep. So we are going to move the needle faster if we get those companies on board. But we're making great strides. As I said earlier, it amazes me the last 3 years how fast it's picking up steam. I was just over in England in October, and they're actually moving from a farm program that pays farmers for yield, pounds, etc., to one that pays farmers and ranchers for ecological outcomes. In other words, how clean is the water coming off your landscape? How much carbon are you putting into your soil? How much biodiversity is on your farm? That's how they're going to be paid. So I tell farmers back here in the States, you're kidding yourselves if you don't think that's coming here sooner or later. It will be.
Yep. And I think when I was first I've been on this journey for about 5 years, started the podcast in, I think it was in December of November of 2017. So just over 5 years now that I've been doing this. And I was introduced to you about that time early on in this journey. And I think at that time, one of the things you were saying is that there's going to come a day when your consumer can scan that product in the grocery store and kind of get the nutrient density profile of that food as well. And so would that be the next step, a better step in your mind, is farmers paid for nutrient density rather than just even ecological outcomes?
Well, I think you have to combine both of them, because we can't just produce nutrient-dense food at all costs and not pay attention to what's happening ecologically. But the good news is, Clay, that it's going to be much, much more difficult for those to quote unquote scam this system. It's not like you can go spray these phytonutrients onto an apple as it comes down an assembly line. No, it has to come through the soil. It will bring to light, though, negative aspects of some of the ways that we grow and raise food now. You know, one of the things is we're going to have to get much more diverse diets into our livestock. We're going to have to grow things in soil rather than just in a medium of some type, you know, in a greenhouse. It has to be in living soils, because it's only through that diverse biology in the soil that the plants get this wide array of nutrients they need.
Right. It's not just gray or black or brown styrofoam that we're growing plants in. We've got soil down there.
Yeah. Once I toured, there was like 5 acres of under a greenhouse in Colorado, and they were growing tomatoes. Here, take a bite. So I did. I don't know what I took a bite of, but it wasn't a tomato. You know?
I've been saying
it's
this.
Like,
yeah, go ahead. I've been saying this for a while, that in our food system, it doesn't have to perform like a tomato in your body. It just has to look like a tomato on the shelf.
Yeah.
You know,
well, that's exactly right. I contend that we don't eat food anymore. Most people eat food like substances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We watched my grandkids a few weeks ago, and my wife had picked up a box of crackers at the grocery store, and I got looking at them. There was 59 ingredients in those crackers. They went in the garbage can. They're not going in my grandkids' mouths.
They were probably whole grain though, Gabe. They were probably whole grain.
Probably.
Somebody one time described that as spray tan nutrients. Those and literally, I think it is in some of those like cereals and stuff. As they're going down the conveyor belt, there's a sprayer that's spraying on some of these nutrients, quote unquote, you know, 18 whole grains or whatever it is, or 18 grams of whole grains that you see everywhere.
But that's the beautiful thing about this work they're doing, looking at phytonutrients, is you need a mass spectrometer. It can measure well over 2,000 different phytonutrient compounds. You can't spray those on, you know, so that's good. That's going to separate what's really happening.
Yeah. So what are the next steps in your mind? What does the next 1, 3, 5, 10 years look like?
Yeah, the first year we have to realize we have a problem. You know, I talked to a lot of farmers, ranchers. Many refuse to believe it, but more and more do. They know that what they're doing isn't in the long-term best interest of their farm, their family, and the ecosystem. Then it comes down to education. You know, we have to, as we said earlier, educate farmers, ranchers, consumers, our policymakers. We have to, all of them need to understand how ecosystem functions and realize, though, it's not going to be easy. Like, you look at the healthcare system is based on treating something. It's not based on prevention. Mm-hmm. We need to get back to a system where food is preventative medicine, and that's going to take some time. And then I really believe within 5 years, the majority of food you'll be able to trace it from the supermarket back to where it was grown and raised. That will be critical, because it's going to differentiate then. The companies are going to want to highlight the work of these producers that are doing a good job. And so that should add profitability to the producer there who is doing a good job. And it's going to differentiate. Those who aren't are going to receive less. And then I really think what I talked about with you that 5 years ago, that is coming. As a matter of fact, we're working with a company out of Canada who has developed that technology to scan those products, and it's pretty amazing. One of the things they're working on, just to let you know, is, and they actually have prototypes out. And you know how farmers take soil tests, but you got to send them to a lab and get those tests run. Well, they've developed scanners where it's a matter of less than 15 seconds, you'll have the results back. You'll stick a probe in the soil and it'll tell you the composition of both organic and inorganic fractions of nutrients in the soil. And they're working on biology next. So this type of technology is rapidly being developed. It's pretty exciting.
You know, one of the things that you mentioned early on is getting that carbon out of the atmosphere. Is there an upper limit in your experience to that? Is there such a thing as too much carbon, or have we just not found that yet where there's still more room?
Well, it's not so matter of how much, it's how much biology is along with it. Obviously, you know, we do work. There's places in Michigan where it's peat type soils, some of those up in Canada. We're doing work in England, same thing. Those peat type soils, you can get 30 to 40%, you know, organic matter in those soils, but they need to be biologically active. So I don't think we need to worry about there being an upper limit. You know, on our ranch, we have cropland soils over 8% now, which some soil scientists believe was probably higher than what was here pre-European settlement. But the soil's functioning. All I know is I don't have to buy fertilizer, and that's a good thing.
I think when I first started hearing you talk about it, it was more like 5%. Is that right?
Yeah, we started at less than 2, and now we're from 5.3 to over 8, depending on which field.
And how quickly is that adding? Just
well, realize it could add a lot more quickly, but I'm taking my reward. See, I haven't had to buy any synthetic fertility since 2007 because I'm relying on the natural cycle. So my biology is consuming some of that. So this is the issue with those who are selling their carbon credits. Okay. Well, if you're focused on just increasing your carbon, you're not going to be reaping that reward. And the other thing is about carbon credits. I'll just mention it briefly. I think we're going to run into some real issues where a farmer goes and sells, or rancher sells their carbon credits, but then they want to claim their beef is carbon friendly and direct market that. Well, you can't do that. You already technically sold your carbon credits. You can't claim it for that beef also, or that bushel of corn, or whatever the fact, you know, may be. So there's going to be some real issues coming about as a result of that.
Yeah. And I finally remembered that question that I was going to ask you. That would have been a lot better segue than the one I actually asked you after I had a brain fart there. But what does the transition look like in the I states? So, for example, you know, I think that's a lot of fence row to fence row, corn and soybeans. You know, as one friend said, corn and soybeans isn't a rotation; it's a mindset. You know, so what does the transition look like there? Are we gonna see a lot of that? Does it need to be converted? I mean, I think it needs to be more diverse. I'd love to hear your thoughts on a 14-year crop rotation with 7 years of perennials and grazing. Yeah, you know, but does it need to be
great
converted?
Question, Clay. And that is a challenge. We do a lot of work in the I states, and unfortunately, the corn bean rotation has spread well beyond the I states. I have a neighbor here who is in a corn bean rotation, and they've harvested one bean crop in 10 years. Now, you tell me how you can stay in business doing that. You can't unless you're taking advantage of crop insurance, and that's just wrong. Let's face it, the vast majority of planting decisions are made by the fact of what farmers and ranchers can get through revenue insurance. And that's just a ridiculous format they have, because you're basing the price based on the previous year's price. And so you're just actually perpetuating lower crop prices. So we don't need to get into that discussion. But I think this comes down to the education and educating policymakers that it's a bad policy. You know, how long, with $31 trillion in debt, how long can the American taxpayers subsidize that type of system? And then we also have to realize that there is the vast majority of corn and beans are being grown and raised for very little is for human consumption. Okay, we're feeding, ruminants grain, which we know is unhealthy for the ruminant, and it leads to omega-6-3 ratios, CLA ratios, numbers that are not what we would want them to be in beef. We can have a whole nother program about that. And, right now, 43%, last I heard, of corn produced in the U.S. goes for ethanol production. We can have a conversation whether that's really cost effective or not. Yeah, farmers can sell their corn, but what's the true cost when we look at the degradation of the landscape and the true cost to consumers? So we need to get away from a straight corn bean rotation. And this gets back to paying farmers based on ecological outcomes, paying them based on nutrient density, and realizing that an important way around that is they have to diversify the crop rotation. And I get sick of talking to the I-States, and they say, oh, but I don't have a market for that. And I tell them, well, doesn't your semi have tires? You can drive further than the local grain elevator, to market your crop. And there's crops that are much, much more profitable than corn and soybeans, but they only look at it from the standpoint of what they can collect from revenue insurance. So we have to think beyond that.
I mean, I'm probably among the most crop illiterate people in the world. So this might be totally wrong, but to me, it seems like the corn and soybean thing is basically one of the few, if not the only, no risk opportunity out there. I mean, it's hard to get away from that because the risk has been insured out of it, and the insurance has been subsidized so that you don't have to pay it in a sense.
Yeah. Well, they pay a small percentage of what the true cost of that crop. By they, I mean the farmer pays a small percentage of what the true cost of that is. But you're absolutely right. There are other crops out there that are about the same way. Now, obviously, it depends a bit on where you're located and your proven yields, et cetera. But we all know the games that are played there. And come on, look in the mirror. Everyone knows that nearly all farmers have played games with crop insurance at one time or another. Let's be honest about this. And we just have to be honest with ourselves that, I talk about how I'm very open to tell people that I took advantage of crop insurance, government programs, EQIP, CSP for years. But then I got to the point where, why am I doing this? And it really bothered me, and I stopped. And what I found is I'm much, much more profitable now than I ever was then, because I can change my crop rotation according to demands, according to profitability. Whereas if you're playing that game, you're just stuck in there. Yes, you may be making some money, but at what cost? You're degrading your resource. I'm regenerating mine. And I don't mean to make it sound I'm putting myself above anybody. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying, though, is we all have to look in the mirror, and we all have to answer to ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And just, I mean, I'll share. I've got a CSP contract on my place, and it was, for me, honestly, it was about making ends meet at that point when I signed that. But you do see that there's they want it done a certain way, and then there's going to be probably some moment where what's best for the land and the animals is not going to be reflected by the plan that they've set in place. And so we and then also I look across the fence, and honestly, I could pay for that place with a CSP contract. But what does that do to property values? What does that do
exactly.
to the price of land? When I look across the fence and say, I could buy that place if I just put a CSP contract on it, it inflates the property values. And again,
and what
all
does
of what
that
we're talking
do
about,
for
government picking winners and losers, is really one of the major issues here.
Yeah, and what does that do for young people trying to start in this business? Yep. I know of farmers in Illinois, Indiana, who are paying over $500 an acre cash rent. I mean, that's just mind-boggling, and they're doing it because they know that revenue insurance. And I tell people, I'm not saying don't take advantage of those programs if you're starting out. But for crying out loud, Clay, there's a lot of people who are well-heeled who, why not let that go to somebody who really needs the help? Let it go to a young person who's starting out.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. We could talk all day about this. This is an issue that's been, 80 years to a millennia in the making. And so, obviously we're not going to do it justice totally in an hour, but I'd just like to give you the opportunity to maybe, if you can, make the pitch of what is in your ideal system, what does it look like for the suburban mom or family in their grocery acquisition? What's that look like in your mindset?
That's a great question. And what we encourage those consumers is get to know your farmer or rancher. And one of the things COVID did is it made it extremely easy to source products from a farmer or rancher. My son, every Monday, he boxes product and ships it out directly to people's doors. So don't tell me you can't get to know your farmers or ranchers. We have an open door policy on our ranch. Anybody can come at any time and look at anything. So if I'm a consumer, no matter where you live, say you're in Denver, Colorado, go to the farmer's market during the summer, get to know that farmer, go out to their place. If I'm assuming it's within driving distance, if they're selling at a farmer's market, get to know what they have available and how they're producing that. Okay. Are they producing it in a way that you feel confident what you're putting in your children's mouth is healthy food? That's the first step. Now, a lot are going to say, oh, but it costs a lot more. What does healthcare cost? I don't know. I honestly don't know if I can name a family where at least one or two of that household isn't on some type of prescription. Mm-hmm. Okay. We have to get thinking of food as preventative medicine. And you have to take that into account when you're buying your groceries. What does that do for your healthcare costs? Okay. If you're not spending, boy, I tell you, I just had an uncle pass away who was in a nursing home. It was over $10,000 a month to be in a nursing home. It's like, wow. Let's start thinking of food as health.
That's one of my goals is to, totally unrelated, but that's one of my goals is to build a house next to mine for my parents and my in-laws to move into, because I can do that cheaper than I can pay for them to be in assisted living.
Yeah, absolutely. I just
not
told
to mention
Paul,
the wisdom value of having them next door to my kids,
Oh, that's exactly right. See, I just told Paul, my son, you just take Dad for a walk when it's that time on a cold winter's night.
Yeah, very good. Well, Gabe, I really appreciate your time today. Anything else that you really think needs to be shared with regard to this subject?
Well, I would just encourage your listeners to check out our Understanding Ag website or our Soil Health Academy website. We have a lot of free information on regenerative agriculture, and check it out. And we look forward to seeing them further down the regenerative path.
Yep. And absolutely all of that will be linked in the show notes page for today, workingcows.net/277. Gabe, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
And this episode is brought to you by C90 Ocean Minerals, the first step in regenerative agriculture. C90 offers a complete spectrum of natural minerals and trace elements that feed soil biology, enzymes, and fungi to help regenerate your soil matrix and improve soil fertility. Herd and pasture health starts with soil health, and C90 restores the optimal mineral balance needed for healthy, productive soil. Naturally unlock locked up fertilizer nutrients, expand root networks, and reduce risk, all while investing equally in this season and the ones to come. Give them a call today, and their experts will develop a complimentary custom program that fits your operation. Call 717-580-1458. That's 717-580-1458, or visit c-90.com. Available nationwide and around the world. Very good stuff there. Really appreciate Gabe always and his perspective, and would encourage you to seek out their programs and what they've got going on there at Understanding Ag. Very excited to share with you next week, coming up on episode 278 of the Working Cows podcast, my interview with Buck Brannaman. Had the opportunity to go to Buck's place there in Sheridan, Wyoming, and sit down with him and talk a little bit about the history of vaquero horsemanship. There's lots of different ways to refer to it: California horsemanship, others spade bit horsemanship, and some of those things. We talk about all the elements, kind of the gear that makes that style of horsemanship distinctive, and the history of it, how it came to America. And we go way back to the Muslim conquest of Spain and some of those things, and then all the way to kind of the present day and how it got here and how it was kept alive and how it was brought to America. So an interview I'd been trying to lock down for a couple of years, and finally got our schedules coordinated, and we're able to do it, and really look forward to sharing that with you, coming your way real soon on another episode of the Working Cows podcast. We'll see you then.
We invite you to visit workingcows.net to subscribe to the show via iTunes or Stitcher. You'll also find detailed show notes pages, resources from our guests, and the industry leaders who have influenced them. For more ideas on putting your cows to work for you in a more profitable way, tune in next week.
Very cool. I got lost listening to you, Gabe, so I'm going to think for a second on my next question. Is there